We're reading in Book 5, the Book of Love. And we've come to the last canto, Canto 3, Shraddhavan and Savitri. The prince living in exile in the forest, the princess traveling around the world to find the destined partner of her life. They have met in the forest and recognized each other. So last week we were reading on page 409. We came to line 345. And the last part that we read was a description of how Savitri gathered from the edge of the forest an armful of the little flowers, and she quickly made a garland, a beautiful garland. So we're going to read on from there about the garland and what she does with it. I will read to the end of the section, and then we'll go back and look at each sentence in detail. Profound in perfume and immersed in hue, they mixed their yearnings' colored signs and made the bloom of their purity and passion one. A sacrament of joy in treasuring palms she brought, flower symbol of her offered life. Then, with raised hands that trembled a little now at the very closeness that her soul desired, this bond of sweetness, their bright union's sign, she laid on the bosom coveted by her love. As if inclined before some gracious God who has out of his mist of greatness shone to fill with beauty his adorers' hours. She bowed and touched his feet with worshipping hands. She made her life his world for him to tread, and made her body the room of his delight, her beating heart a remembrancer of bliss. He bent to her and took into his own their married yearning, joined like folded hopes. As if a whole rich world suddenly possessed, wedded to all he had been, became himself, an inexhaustible joy made his alone. He gathered all Savitri into his clasp. Around her, his embrace became the sign of a locked closeness through slow, intimate years. A first sweet summary of delight to come, one brevity intense of all long life. In a wide moment of two souls that meet. She felt her being flow into him, as in waves a river pours into a mighty sea. As when a soul is merging into God, to live in him forever and know his joy, her consciousness grew aware of him alone, and all her separate self was lost in his. As a starry heaven encircles happy earth, he shut her into himself in a circle of bliss, and shut the world into himself and her. A boundless isolation made them one. He was aware of her enveloping him and let her penetrate his very soul, as is a world by the world's spirit filled, as the mortal wakes into eternity, as the finite opens to the infinite. Thus were they in each other lost a while. Then, drawing back from their long ecstasy's trance, came into a new self and a new world. Each now was a part of the other's unity. The world was but their twin self-findings seen, or their own wedded being's vaster frame. On the high glowing cupola of the day, fate tied a knot with morning's halo threads, while by the ministry of an auspice hour, heart-bound before the sun, their marriage fire, the wedding of the eternal Lord and spouse, took place again on earth in human forms. In a new act of the drama of the world, the united two began a greater age. In the silence and murmur of that emerald world, and the mutter of the priest wind's sacred verse, amid the choral whispering of the leaves, love's twain had joined together and grew one. The natural miracle was wrought once more. In the immutable, ideal world, one human moment was eternal made. You'll begin, Suresh?
Performed in compassion one.
So to know who these they are, we have to look at the previous sentence. It is the flowers. No? So the flowers that she's arranged into a beautiful garland, they have a deep perfume, and they are immersed, they are soaked with color. They have deep colors also. And he says these flowers, they mix two qualities. They mix together their colored signs. They are many different colors. And they made the bloom, the blossoming of their purity and passion one. So beautiful, fresh, wild flowers, there's something pure about them. No? But when they are filled with this deep perfume and these intense colors, there's also, yes, an intensity, the passion, the intense feeling. So they express both of those things, the purity and the passion, all together in this garland.
Yearnings.
Yearnings. Yearnings are when we feel longing for something. No? There's a kind of aspiration in nature. Mother has spoken about it, no? That the flowers are worshipping the sun and they are longing for that energy and beauty and fire and light. So there's some intensity and passion in that yearning. So the colors and the perfume are signs of that aspiration, that longing, which is expressed in the flowers. You would read Bhavana? Bhavana.
Yes. A sacrament of joy in treasury form, she brought the symbol of her offered life. Then with raised hands that trembled a little now, at the very closeness that her soul desired, this bond of sweetness, their bright union sign, she laid on the bosom coveted by her love.
So she brings this garland as an offering, a sacrament. It's a kind of sacred act. So this is her sacrifice of joy, and she brings them, the flower, the garland, in her palms, in the palms of the hands. And those palms, as she holds the garland there, they are treasuring this garland as something very precious and special and sacred, no? Because it's the symbol of her own life which she is going to offer now to Shraddhavan. This is the traditional way, if we go back to those old Indian traditional times, and even now it's continued in the traditional marriage ceremony, that the bride chooses or accepts her husband by putting a garland around his neck. No? So that's exactly what she does. No? She raises her hands, and very touchingly, Sri Aurobindo says the hands are trembling a little bit, no? Because this is so special to her to be close to Shraddhavan. And of course she wouldn't be used to being close to a man like that, no? But this is what her soul desires. So there's a little shyness, a little hesitation. She lays on his bosom, over his head, on his bosom, she lays this bond of sweetness. A bond, it's a tie, something that connects two things. So this garland that she's offering, this is the sign of their, of the sweetness of their union. It's the sign of their union, of their coming together, of their becoming one. Anybody wants to ask anything?
Coveted means
To covet. Covet normally is what we are told we shouldn't do. We shouldn't desire things. We shouldn't be wanting things that we don't have. But Sri Aurobindo uses it here to express perhaps something of the intensity of her love for Shraddhavan. Klaus, would you read?
As if inclined before some gracious God, who has out of his mist of greatness shone, to fill with beauty his adorers' hours, she bowed and touched his feet with worshipping hands. She made her life his word for him to tread, and made her body the room of his delight. A beating heart, a remembrancer of bliss.
So in that traditional marriage, the wife is supposed to accept the husband as the image of the divine for her. He will be the form in which she will worship and serve the divine. So Savitri is following this practice also in a deeper sense. She's bowing down as if in front of a God, some gracious God, who has suddenly appeared out of his mist of greatness. He has shone out and made himself visible to his adorer, to his worshipper, to fill with beauty his adorer's hours. So, as might happen with somebody who has a vision of the eternal beloved, Savitri bows down and she touches his feet. It's a sign of submission and worship. She touched his feet with worshipping hands. Worship is what we offer to that God that we adore. And with that touching of his feet, she's offering or giving her life for him to tread on, to make his base, the base of his life, and to become his world, and made her body the room of his delight. A physical marriage is the union of two bodies, and she's accepting him in that sense also. And her heart, the heart, beating heart, Sri Aurobindo says, will be for her a remembrancer of bliss. A remembrancer. To remember means to recall to memory. If you need something to remind you, to give you, to make you do that act of remembrance, it's a word that might be used for an alarm clock or something. Nowadays people have these digital watches and suddenly they make a noise and remind you that it's 11 o'clock or whatever. In a very crude sense, this is a remembrancer. But for her, this remembrancer will be every heartbeat, reminding her that she's alive, she's experiencing the bliss of being one with Shraddhavan. Barbara?
He bent to her and took into his own their merry journey joined like folded books. This is the whole rich word suddenly processed, ready to fall in their seas, became himself. And in inexhaustible joy, nature's alone, he gathered all Savitri into his grasp.
So she is bent down and touched his feet. And then he bends down and he takes her hands into his own. So her hands are like this, and he puts his hands around them. They are married, yearning, joined like folded hopes. These 4 sets of hopes coming together. His hands and her hands. So here again is this yearning, this longing, this aspiration to be together. So that this is symbolized by the hands. And then he takes the whole Savitri into his clasp. He embraces her. And when he embraces her, when he gathers all of her into his clasp, it's as if he's suddenly taking possession of a whole world, a whole rich world that has become wedded, has become united to everything that he has been in the past. Now it becomes a part of himself. So this embracing possession of Savitri is an inexhaustible joy which belongs to him alone, not to anybody else. This wonderful experience has been given specially to him. And this embrace that he can give her is the sign of that.
Around her, with his embrace, became the sign of the locked curtains whose slowly intellect years, the first sweet summary of delight to come, one brevity intense from all long life.
Yes. So this embrace is a sign also. It's a sign of the way that they will be close together, very close together, a locked closeness. They will not be able to be separated through many years, slow years of intimacy, of closeness. So this embrace is just a summary, a first sweet summary of all that delight that's going to come through many long years of intimate married life. It's one intense, short moment. Sri Aurobindo says brevity. Brevity is shortness. So this is an intense, short moment that sums up the whole of a long life to come. Sergei?
In a white moment of 2 souls that meet, she felt her being drawn into him as an embrace. A river pours into a mighty sea.
So she feels her being flowing like a river into him in this wide moment. 2 souls meeting, and she pours all herself into him. She feels her whole being flowing into him, just the way that a river flows into the sea when it reaches the ocean. Michael, will you read?
Yes. As when the soul is merging into God, to live in Him forever and up now is growing. Her consciousness grew aware of Him alone, and all her separate self was lost in this.
So he compares this merging to the merging of the soul in the infinite. When the soul is merging, losing its separate individuality, melting back into its origin, into the divine. It's going to live in him forever. It's going to experience the divine joy. So in a similar way, Savitri's consciousness grew aware only of Shraddhavan. There's nothing else that exists. And all her sense of being a separate self gets lost, gets dissolved in his being. So this is how she experiences this moment of union. Mahalingam.
As a starry Bhavan encircles happy acts, he shut into himself in a circle of bliss and shut the world within himself and death.
So, a starry heaven, a vast sky full of many lights, no? And that is as if embracing the earth, which is happy to be embraced by this wonderful starry sky. So in this embrace, he shut her into himself in this circle of bliss, of intense delight. And in doing that, shutting her into himself, he shut the world, the whole universe, into the two of them in their union. Earlier he had said that if they come together it will be like that, no? That I will discover the whole world in a new way, in a divine way. So now this is happening. Is it clear? Anybody wants to ask anything? No? Would you like to read now? Yes?
A boundless isolation made them one. He was aware of her enveloping him, and let her penetrate his very soul, as is evolved by the world spirit of
Filled.
As the mortal wakes into eternity, as the
finite, as the finite.
As the finite opens to the infinite.
Thank you. Yes. So in this embrace of the starry heaven embracing the happy earth, this is a boundless, limitless isolation. And there's nothing but him and her, and the whole world is within them. So this makes them one. They are united in this vast separateness. She has experienced herself pouring into him like a river pouring into the sea, but he feels her enveloping him, surrounding him, and penetrating, going deep inside into his very soul. So penetrating deep, deep right to the very core of himself. And this, Sri Aurobindo again, he likens this to the way that a world, a universe, is filled by the spirit of that world. The spirit inhabits it, it's there in every particle and part of the world. So that's how he feels filled by Savitri. It's like when a mortal being, a being who is subject to death, wakes up into a consciousness where there's no death and no time, beyond all limits. As the mortal wakes into eternity, he feels like that. He feels the experience of the finite, a limited, defined, separate being, something which is boundaries and limits, opening up to the infinite, where there's no boundaries and there's no limits. So just as she felt herself dissolving in him, he feels himself surrounded and penetrated, and he dissolves into her. Joel, would you read?
Thus were they in each other lost a while, then drawing back from their long ecstatic strands, came into a new self and a new world.
So there's this embrace and this experience of the merging of their beings. They lose themselves in each other. And this lasts some time. This is like a long ecstasy. It takes time, and it's a kind of trance when they're out of the world and out of the sense of themselves. But then they draw back from that trance, back into their individualities again, but they come into a new self. That self that they draw back into, this individual self, is different from what was there before. A new self, and the whole world is changed for them. And in the next sentence, Sri Aurobindo describes how it is different. Would you read, please, sir?
Each now was a part of the others in it. The world was but the twin self-finding same, are their own welded beings vast of free.
Yes. So each of them, Shraddhavan and Savitri, each of them was part of the oneness of the other. And the world, the universe that they live in, is just the scene for their twin self-finding. They are two in one, they're connected, and now they will be experiencing the world around them, always with the other there as part of their exploration, their growth and their experience. Or perhaps the world is just the vaster framework, the frame, the surrounding of their own being, their oneness, their own wedded being, the two who have become one. And the world is just a vaster expression of that oneness. Now in the next lines, Sri Aurobindo again refers to the Indian marriage ceremony. The imagery is connected with that. Would you read, please, Gangalakshmi?
On the eye glowing of color of the day, fed time north with morning's hollow trees, while the ministry of an auspicious hour, how bound before the sun, their marriage fire, the wedding of the eternal Lord and spouse, took place again on earth in human forms. In the new act of the drama of the world, the
United
two began the greater age.
So a cupola is a high dome. And I think when in the marriage ceremony there'll be a kind of canopy, covering the bride and the groom. They sit underneath some covering. So here he says the sky is the covering. And it's the day, is surrounding them. High, glowing noonday. And in the marriage ceremony. Somebody, it'll be a priest perhaps, who ties the knot, who ties together the gown of the bride and the gown of the groom. That's the sign of their marriage, of their oneness. So here it is fate, it is destiny, which is taking that role of the one who unites them, officially ties the knot, and it's using these bright golden threads of the morning to tie it. And the ministry of an auspice hour. Ministry, this suggests a priest again. There's some officiating person who performs the marriage. Here it is time. It is a special moment, an auspice hour. We know this word auspicious, something that is full of good promise, good omen. Here Sri Aurobindo has said that it is the hour that is full of that significance. And that is what brings them together. They are connected heart to heart, and the witness of this is the sun. So again, in the Indian marriage, there will be a fire, who is the witness, the representative of the divine presence, witnessing the union of the two. No? And they have to be married in front of the fire. So here their fire is the sun. Here's their marriage fire. This wedding of the eternal Lord and spouse. This is not just a prince and a princess getting married. This is the eternal Lord and the eternal bride, here being represented in human forms. This has happened before, it's not the first time it's happening, but again it's taking place in human forms. And because this marriage takes place, this is something so significant. It's a new act, the beginning of a new act of the drama of the world, the whole drama of history and evolution. These two united, these two who have become one, began a greater age. Their coming together launches the beginning of a new age. Nina.
In the silence and
Mutter.
of the winds sacred bells, and the children whispering on the leaves, love's bring had journeyed together in the blue.
So this has not happened in some grand marriage hall in the Paris, anything like that. This has happened out there in the forest, in the silence and the murmur. There's a silence in the forest, but there's also a sound going on, no? Of that emerald world, the world of the leaves, the trees. And just as in the marriage ceremony, there'll be a priest there, a Brahmin there, chanting the sacred verses. Here there's the tree, the wind, no? The wind who is acting as the priest and uttering the sacred verses just by its blowing. So that mutter, that's when we can't hear the words very clearly. Sometimes when the Brahmin does the chanting, he makes a sound and we can't distinguish clearly the words that he's saying. The important thing is that they get said somehow. So here it's the wind that is playing that role. And then, like a choir, the leaves are also making their contribution, singing, whispering. No? So in this way, these two beings who represent love, love's twain. Twain, it means two, and it does mean two separate beings. When we say twain, even there's a line where Sri Aurobindo says that the thing we have to do is to join what now is separate and twain. No? But here they these twain, these two have joined together and they have become one. Rosa.
The nature of the miracle was wrought once more in the immutable ideal world. One human moment was eternal made.
So there's a very deep suggestion in these lines. There's a miracle in nature, in the coming together of, we can say, soul and nature, Lord and spouse, the Lord and the mother. No? So this miracle, this something which is beyond our understanding. This has happened again, was wrought, it has been done, made one more time. And what does it mean? It means the coming together of the unchanging, immutable, ideal world. The world where the perfect forms of everything that happens here is there, always unchanging. No? But there, in that immutable, unchanging, ideal world, something that has happened here on earth, one human moment, has become eternal. And this is something that is special in Sri Aurobindo's teaching, I believe. There are those who believe in that ideal world and that everything here is a more or less distorted and imperfect representation of what is in that ideal world. But is there a possibility that something that happens here on earth in the material world can affect that eternal world and perhaps bring about a change there, which then gets again reflected here? And that's what he seems to be saying.
Profound in perfume and immersed in hue, they mixed their yearnings' coloured signs and made the bloom of their purity and passion one. A sacrament of joy in treasuring palms she brought, flower symbol of her offered life. Then, with raised hands that trembled a little now at the very closeness that her soul desired, this bond of sweetness, their bright union's sign, she laid on the bosom coveted by her love. As if inclined before some gracious God, who has out of his mist of greatness shone to fill with beauty his adorers' hours. She bowed and touched his feet with worshipping hands. She made her life his world for him to tread, and made her body the room of his delight, her beating heart a remembrancer of bliss. He bent to her and took into his own their married yearning, joined like folded hopes. As if a whole rich world suddenly possessed, wedded to all he had been, became himself, an inexhaustible joy made his alone. He gathered all Savitri into his clasp. Around her his embrace became the sign of a locked closeness through slow, intimate years, a first sweet summary of delight to come, one brevity intense of all long life. In a wide moment of two souls that meet, she felt her being flow into him as in waves a river pours into a mighty sea. As when a soul is merging into God to live in him forever and know his joy, her consciousness grew aware of him alone, and all her separate self was lost in his. As a starry heaven encircles happy earth, he shut her into himself in a circle of bliss, and shut the world into himself and her. A boundless isolation made them one. He was aware of her enveloping him, and let her penetrate his very soul, as is a world by the world's spirit filled. As the mortal wakes into eternity, as the finite opens to the infinite. Thus were they in each other lost a while. Then, drawing back from their long ecstasy's trance, came into a new self and a new world. Each now was a part of the other's unity. The world was but their twin self-finding scene, or their own wedded being's vaster frame. On the high glowing cupola of the day, fate tied a knot with morning's halo threads, while by the ministry of an auspice hour, heart bound before the sun, their marriage fire, the wedding of the eternal Lord and Spouse, took place again on earth in human forms. In a new act of the drama of the world, the united two began a greater age. In the silence and murmur of that emerald world, and the mutter of the priest wind's sacred verse, amid the choral whispering of the leaves, loves twain had joined together and grew one. The natural miracle was wrought once more. In the immutable ideal world, one human moment was eternal made.